Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We are clearly back from Vegas, which means we're back to our normal setups, obviously. But Vegas was so much fun. We have a huge vlog coming out the same day as this episode, so run that all the way up. We really appreciate the support. And like I said, the continued support is definitely helpful for us. We're growing stronger and faster, so please like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. But a lot has, happened, summer league wise, but we do have to address once again Mr. Lillard. He is in the rumor mill again. This is the never-ending cycle with him. But we got a huge Bleacher Report noti, involving Lillard, and it's kind of interesting because we're kind of getting closer to see, what kind of package Portland is looking for in terms of return for Damian Lillard. So the noti read, Miami has 3 first-round picks along with Hero and a potential trade package, but Portland wants 4 picks, and that's via the Oregonian. Um, and yeah, the title was Heat Get Closer on Dame Trade. So, I'm not really sure how the Heat are going to be able to, finesse this and get this along because it's like I feel like their best package is 100%, Hero and the 3 picks because I mean, there's nothing really else to offer because, I guess the other movable parts would be like Duncan Robinson and maybe like a few other people, but you know, y-
Salary wise, that's how it would work.
yeah, and it's like if the Trailblazers don't like those options, then it's like they can easily just move on to a better suitor. Um, and like my thing is, Miami also is in a situation where they're not just going to lie down and let Portland kind of ramsack the roster. Jimmy Butler is off limits. Bam is off limits as well. And
Yeah.
Portland, this is something that people don't realize. Portland doesn't have to even negotiate with Miami in the first place. Um, but they're just trying to do, Dame some justice here. But it sounds like it's probably going to get
Oh,
uglier very
wow.
soon. Miami does have the 3 first rounds: Tyler Hero, Filler, and like I guess another young player. And I think that's what they're probably going to go with. I don't think it's going to get much better than that. And I guess the solution would probably be, finding that 4th first round pick. And I think, if say Portland doesn't want Hero, I think you just have to find someone else to take Hero and then, give them, that other first round pick and then you can move that as well. So then that kind of adds up to what Portland's asking price is. And, people are saying it's pretty close. They just have to iron out the details. So I'm thinking maybe like another month max, maybe less. I think that's when we'll probably see the deal done or even another deal done. But I don't know. This is very interesting, and I'm hoping and praying that it doesn't really drag on, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah, and it's like, what were your thoughts on what we've heard so far? And then we can kind of get into, what would happen, like say Lillard does get actually moved to Miami. Where does that put Miami, especially in the weak East right now? Because, Paul Pierce did come out and say some interesting things that we'll get into, once we hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when you look at the Lillard situation, it makes sense, right? What's
Hmm.
going on? It's like just negotiations,
Yep.
right? Obviously, Miami wants to get Lillard, but they don't want to give up, a king's ransom. They want to get him for like the lowest possible, offer in terms of like what they can get back. And
Right.
even their best offer, isn't a lot, right? Because basically it's Hero, some combination of filler salary, and then picks, right? And the Miami picks aren't going to mean much because while they have those 3 guys, they're going to be good, as long as they're healthy. And
Right.
then, when you look at the players that they're giving back, right? If you're Portland, the best player you get back in the trade can't really, or not the best player, but you can't only get back Tyler Hero and Miami's picks in the trade. That's just not enough for Damian Lillard, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, um, when you think about it, there are guys like you look at the Durant deal for when he went to Phoenix, right? Brooklyn got back Cal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and then like a boatload of Phoenix picks,
Right.
right? Exactly. So obviously Damian Lillard isn't Kevin Durant. So obviously you're not going to get the same quality of deal. But when those negotiations first began, remember Brooklyn was looking for even more than what they
Hmm.
ended up taking back. Like they still got back a good deal, but remember they were like, hey Boston, if you want Kevin Durant, you're going to have to give us like Jalen Brown and other players, or But then we saw other teams; they didn't even budge, right? Because say they were like Memphis wants Kevin Durant, but they don't want to give up Ja or Triple J or Desmond Bain. And it's like,
Right.
well, if you're not going to give up any three of those guys, then that's just, that's not a good enough return. So
Sure.
it just kind of comes down to, like what can Miami do to make the offer, I guess, like a little bit better, right? Because but it also depends on how many teams are actually serious about getting Damian Lillard. Because then you also have to factor in, right? Like his agent mentioned, like, he only wants to play for Miami, right? His agent, he was even putting out there, like, if he goes to another team, he's not going to show up, which
Right.
I don't think he'll do that.
It's just a
But
threat.
yeah, but regardless, if you're another team, you almost do kind of have to worry about like, hey, if we trade for this guy, is he going to be, happy playing there? I mean, you would imagine he'd be okay with it, right? But I'm sure, like, obviously his preference is to go to Miami. So a lot of it's just kind of just negotiations at this point, and it just kind of depends on, what can Miami do? Because I do feel like if you're Portland, you shouldn't just take Miami's offer. Like, you should at least try to get, as much as you can. Right. But that's going to have to require, like, as we've mentioned before, like another team, at least, one other team, because Miami doesn't have enough, because they mentioned they can get four or they
Hmm.
can get three first round picks. I think that's how many they can just give up on their own. But they need a fourth one, and that would have to come from another team.
Yeah.
And then they probably need at least something other than Tyler Hero, which would have to come from another team as well. But
Yeah.
I do think for Portland, because you got Scoot and he's really good, there should be, I think, a little more, in my opinion, like pressure to like see if you can move Lillard for a good offer.
Hmm.
But also, like, you shouldn't just take the first offer available. Like, this is kind of just what normally happens where when we see these negotiations, right? Like, what can you get, in terms of maximizing? Because again, you're never going to win the trade for the
Right.
most part unless it's like a guy that's like way out of his prime, because you're not just going to get, the same in terms of the return for like a top, 10 or whatever player. You're just not going to get equal value. So you
Yeah.
already know that. But obviously, like the Miami offer is like really low in terms of what you can get. Again, we still haven't really heard like many other teams like looking to trade for Lillard. Like we've heard, maybe Boston might be interested, but they don't want to give up Jalen Brown. Which
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, right? Like you prefer to give up like, Derek White and Brogdon and something else outside, and not give up Jalen Brown. But that's kind of what we look at here, right? And then like even with the Clippers, right? Like what do they have to offer? If it's not, Paul George, right, then it's just a bunch of other bench guys, right? Which maybe Portland would be okay with, but they don't have really the picks.
Sure.
So it feels like, it all, not that it has to be Miami, but like, at some point you do kind of wonder, like, hey, can you get another team in that deal? Because I feel like that's kind of what's missing. Because that's really it at this point. Because Miami just needs like additional picks and then probably some other better players to send Portland's way.
Yeah.
And like again, that third or fourth team to take on Hero.
Yeah.
But again, once you have that third team involved, then the trades become a lot harder. So, like you said, it could drag out, and that's what a lot of people do think is going to happen. Um, even though we did get this news about, Miami's close, but close still doesn't cut it yet. You got to
Yep.
get across the finish line.
Yeah.
Even though you do have to get to the finish line before you cross it. But
Yeah.
hopefully we're almost there at this point because it does feel like it just kind of needs to happen. We always thought on this podcast, even during the season, right? That like, hey, at some point, like Portland probably should just move on from Dame because I was like, I would rather just keep the pick and rebuild than trade it and try to, just kind of like build a team around Lillard because I just don't think Portland had the ability to build a contender.
Right.
Um, with what they had and like unless they were able to add a superstar, which they wouldn't have for that pick, um, I just didn't see a pathway. So I feel like it will still get done. Um, but again, like we're kind of used to this at this point where like, the Durant trade took months, because like he put that trade request out basically a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. Like it was right on or it was like right around the beginning of free agency
Yep.
last year. And then he didn't get traded until the trade deadline in February. So
Yep.
it's possible Portland could ride it out. I don't know if it'll be that long, just because I feel like if you're Portland, it would probably be, you know, in everyone's best case to kind of just move on,
Yep.
right? Because it's like it's not like the Nets are in because like it's different with Portland because Portland would be in a rebuild. Brooklyn's not in a rebuild right now necessarily because they don't have their own picks,
Right.
for the most part. But I just feel like it's just best for all sides to move on at this
Yeah.
point. And
I
again,
agree.
like you mentioned with the Paul Pierce thing, I mean, yeah, I don't think they would be a first round exit. I mean, I feel like if they can get Lillard, primarily if they don't have to give up like any other key guys, which they're not going to, They should be right there with the other teams in the East, right? Because I
Yeah.
mean, again, they're the team that's been to the finals twice. In the 4 years that they've had Jimmy Butler on the team, they've been to the finals two of those 4 times and almost went a third time. So adding Damian Lillard should only make them better. I mean, because again, like it's just Tyler Hero, presumably, and maybe like a Duncan Robinson or some other filler salary that you're giving up. You're not
Yep.
giving up, like another star, that plays a different position. You're swapping guards,
Yeah.
right? So I think that Lillard is a huge upgrade over Tyler Hero. Like it's not even that Hero's bad. It's just again,
It's
who would
Dame
you
is
rather?
better.
Yeah, he's a much better player. Who would you rather have, Lillard or Tyler Hero?
Right.
Hero's young, right? Now he's on a big contract and he hasn't been like a big time playoff contributor, so that's some knocks on him, for the most part. But he's still a guy that should have some value. I wouldn't be surprised if a team was okay with giving up, a first round pick to get him because he's a good player. Like, is he a great player? No.
Yeah.
That's why Miami is okay with getting rid of him.
Exactly.
Um, but at the end of the day, um, I think there is a potential for the deal to get done. It just kind of, again, like all the reports have said, it just comes down to, can Miami find a way, to get some additional assets for Portland? Because I do agree, if you're from Portland's perspective, Tyler Hero and 3 picks isn't enough for me to get
Yeah.
right? Like,
I
like
agree.
yeah, like if you're a Portland fan, I'm sure most Portland fans would be too upset, if they traded Lillard and got him back. But if you're trying to sell to the fans, hey, for Damian Lillard, we got back Tyler Hero and picks from Miami that aren't going to be that good. I just wouldn't be happy with that if you're a fan, or even if you're Portland's front office or ownership. I wouldn't be happy with that.
Yeah.
So this both sides are basically doing what they got to do in order to get this done, right? Because like obviously Lillard's camp is pushing for the Heat trade. He's trying to get there because that's his preferred destination. Um, and then obviously Portland is trying its best, to get Miami to give up more because why shouldn't they? It's Damian
Right.
Lillard.
Yeah. And
I,
just to clarify,
mhm.
the Damian or the excuse me, the Paul Pierce quote directly was, "If you just add Dame, this team won't make it out of the first round." So extremely harsh. Harsh. Sometimes I feel like these guys say this stuff just for clicks, likes, engagement. You know how it goes. But yeah,
I mean, like,
an early playoff exit for them, I don't agree with because there's no way. I feel like, without Lillard, they're probably like a top five team in the East. So adding Lillard will probably
right,
put them in that top three tier. I think it makes them better than Philly
yeah,
for sure. So I
yeah,
think, that autumn it makes them better than Cleveland too. So
yeah.
I think, they go up a few notches in my opinion.
Without Damian Lillard, they've already been to two NBA finals. So
Right.
I mean, like, now again, if you add Damian Lillard, it doesn't guarantee you a championship,
Right.
but it
Makes you
gets you
better though.
closer. Yeah, it definitely makes you better and it gets you closer because that's how you have to evaluate these trades. It's like it's not specifically does this win us a championship? No,
Yeah.
that's not the denominator because you're gonna lose almost every time because there's no guarantees when it comes to winning a championship. But does it put you closer? It does. If you're Miami, especially if all you're giving up is Tyler Hero.
Yeah.
And again, Tyler Hero is a good player, but he's not Damian Lillard, right? He's Damian Lillard is better. So getting Damian Lillard is going to help out Miami because again, you can still run a lot of the stuff you ran with Tyler Hero, but you're running it with Damian Lillard, who's a better player and is better at those parts of the game. And he's a guy that's got more of a playoff resume than Tyler Hero, right? Has Lillard been great every postseason?
Yeah.
No, not necessarily, but still, he's got a better playoff resume than Hero. He's a better player, and he's going to take pressure off the other guys, right? Because Jimmy Butler, in this year's final wasn't great, but again, you know, when you're tasking him, with doing what he has to do on both ends of the floor, right? Basically, spend a ton of time guarding Jamal Murray, and then obviously do a ton on offense in terms of initiating and trying to score. Like that's a big ask. So
Yeah.
that helps. So Damian Lillard can help in that regard as well. It takes pressure off of everybody. So
Yeah. In this situation, it's kind of weird because it's like, honestly, the Blazers don't have a ton of leverage here. Like, it's rough for them because, like, if you think about it, Lillard has what, 4 years left on his current contract, and they literally entered this situation with pretty much zero leverage because Lillard is arguably the best, player in Trailblazers history, honestly, and he requested a trade to the Heat and nowhere else. Like that's pretty much the only option. And it's like, I mean, they can't really do much with this. So their hands are tied, and I think the asking price I think is fair. I think the asking price is fair, but it's like Miami doesn't necessarily have all those keys, and who are the other suitors? You have to think about that
Yeah.
too. And nobody's really come out publicly and said, we're all in on this. We're trying to negotiate. So I think this is probably going to drag on until they can figure something out.
I mean, I
And
guess,
especially if there's a third or fourth team involved, it's going to drag out even longer because you have to
yeah.
do the outreach and get those guys involved.
I guess if you're like, comparing him to other Blazers, I guess, in terms of recent history, right, you have LaMarcus Aldridge, right, who obviously was very good.
Sure.
Um, then you have, I guess, Bill Walton, right?
Yeah.
I believe he won a title with the Blazers, what, in the 70s,
Yeah.
77?
Yeah, I
And
think
then I
so.
guess you also have Clyde Drexler, and I believe they went to two NBA finals
Yeah.
with him, and he was, a pretty good player as well. So, like some people may agree or disagree, because certainly you can make a case for either of those guys as well. But, Lillard is up there,
Yeah. I think
for
he's
sure.
the best one. I mean, just because of what he's done in general and
Yeah,
accolades in the time era too. I like to factor in eras because
right,
eras back then were a little bit different, and I think the NBA has become a little bit more competitive. Even though Portland hasn't necessarily been competing all that much in recent years, but still I think his numbers don't really lie. Um, so I don't know, but I'm curious to see if like Lillard will maybe even like cave. I'm curious to see who caves first because say we're
right,
into like a gridlock for like, months and months on end. Like, will he maybe like soften the stance and,
right,
maybe expand his list of preferred trade destinations or maybe like another team steps up and makes like a huge appealing offer. Like that would be
right.
crazy if they just steal Lillard like right underneath like Miami's feet. That would be really interesting.
Yeah. So I guess like yeah, because I was gonna say because when you think about it, Durant ended up going where he wanted to go after the months of gridlock, but Phoenix actually had a solid offer. But I guess like yeah, the question is there if it wasn't Miami, who do you see as like somebody who could kind of like sneak in, and take Damian Lillard and just kind of all just come in with like some Godfather offer, um, in terms of like, hey, we have some guys that we can move for Lillard, and
Right.
if you want them, you can take them. Like,
Well,
who do you think?
like I feel like we have to kind of rule out Brooklyn. Like we have to take them off the map because I think they never even showed interest in like the swapping McCall Bridges for the Simons
Yeah,
_3 package. So
they,
I
yeah,
I
they
don't
have the
know.
they have the picks. They don't have the players. I don't
Right.
think.
So it's like I don't know. I would say maybe if the Clippers thing with Harden falls through and like they just and Hart say Harden returns to Philly, then I
Right.
could maybe see, Lillard potentially going to the Clippers. But I don't know. It's because I don't know if this asking price for Lillard is, if it applies to all parties in the NBA, if we're talking all teams, or if this is
Yeah.
Miami specifically. Like
Right.
I'm kind of nervous about the clarification. I feel like I need a little bit more clarification on that. If it's like, an NBA wide stipulation, then we're in trouble because there's not a lot of teams that can offer that. Um, so I would probably say Clippers only if the Harden thing falls through. What about you? What are your other potential suitors? Because I think Brooklyn's out of the race.
I'm kind of with you where like I just don't think Brooklyn is going to give up those players. And
No.
because again, I think they have the picks, but I don't think they have the players.
Right.
Um, I guess like a question is like, is there like a team that we're not really thinking of that could all of a sudden just come in? What if like I guess Boston has been a team, but what if like another team like say like like a Toronto
Yeah, I heard
or
about Toronto. Maybe the Thunder.
yeah Oklahoma City? I don't know about that one. What would they do? Like I guess they
I
would
mean,
give
it
up
could
like
be like a
Josh Giddey.
three-team scenario. So say like
Okay,
I mean, this would be like crazy. Like
right,
I'm just like brainstorming here. Maybe they get like Bertans,
right.
Jang, like Keldon Johnson. I don't know, something like that. And like it would just be a huge deal. And
So you
Oklahoma
go like
City,
Spurs?
yeah. So like it would be a three-team trade. So like the Spurs would get like maybe like this is I don't think the Oklahoma City would do this because I don't think it's worth it to blow up,
Yeah,
their core. But like say like Josh Giddey and then they get like all Depot
yeah,
or something. Like it's just out of it. That's what I'm saying. I feel like Miami is the only realistic option,
yeah.
but they don't
I think
have what Portland is asking for. So
yeah.
it's just funny to me.
I think that's the tough part because it's just, because again, when you go around, the league and you look at a lot of these teams, it's like, how many of these teams really need Damian Lillard? And again, it's not even that he's bad at all. It's just, how many of these teams, like a lot of the teams that are contending are probably relatively satisfied, with who they have at point guard, right?
Sure.
Like Damian Lillard is better than Jamal Murray, but obviously, like, but like, is Denver going to trade for him? Like, no, they're not going to do
No.
that because they're not going to break up what they have, and then again, you look around elsewhere of these other teams. I just, I mean, I don't really see it like, right? Like Phoenix doesn't need to do it, right? Because they're pretty much set with their backcourt with
Yeah.
Beal and Booker.
Yep.
Unless they, run Booker at the three or something, crazy like that.
Right.
Um, again, we mentioned Boston, I suppose, but again, like I don't feel like they really have the players unless they give up, Jalen Brown or somebody like that. But I don't think I would really do that if I'm Boston.
And who
Um,
wants to buy in on this win now stuff? Like
yeah,
like who's gonna really give up 4 first rounds?
right,
That's a
yeah,
lot.
because yeah, exactly, because that's what I'm saying. It almost kind of has to be a team where it's like if we get Damian Lillard, we're in that contender championship mix, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't mean we're gonna win it, but we're in that mix, right? Like Miami would be in there if they can get Lillard, but just don't have enough assets, to get him on their own. They don't have really the players or the picks.
Yeah.
So Boston, I guess, has picks, but I don't feel like they have the players unless they want to give up like a Jalen Brown.
Right.
Um, and then, again, like how many of these other teams are going to, right? Cleveland's not going to do it. I think they're pretty satisfied with their backcourt. Right. The Clippers maybe could do it, but again, they don't really have the players. I think and I don't even really feel like they have picks. I feel like they need like a third team as well, right? Lakers can't do it because they don't have like the contracts. I don't think to fit that in there. Um, and then like again, like Warriors, it was kind of mentioned like maybe they would kick the tires on it, but they ended up going for Chris Paul. Um, but like either, so it's just like I don't know how many. I just don't feel like there's that many options for him. So it almost kind of comes down to if it's not Miami and if it's not Brooklyn, I don't know who else because, like you said, it just doesn't seem like a lot of teams are really like pushing and going all in. Because again, you would think, given his status and given where he ranks amongst most players, that like every team that could have a chance at getting him would be interested. But we just haven't heard that. So
Yeah.
you know,
It's
it,
rough.
yeah. So that's kind of the question here. Is just again, are there any other like random teams that could potentially ask their way into it? And maybe it's possible, but I don't
I
know
feel like
unless
it's Miami or nothing at this
yeah,
point.
I just feel like unless it's a team that has a realistic shot at winning the title, I don't mean, I don't really see it because
Yeah.
again, like a team that's like relatively mediocre, I don't think would do it.
They're
Is it
not gonna
possible
buy
that
in
like
on
maybe
that.
a team like a Minnesota could do it? I mean,
That wouldn't surprise me with all the interesting moves they've
like
they've done in the
yeah,
past.
like is it possible that say like they move like Carl Anthony Towns to Portland or something like that, and
Right.
then maybe Lillard goes to Minnesota, and then somebody else gets moved elsewhere.
But I don't
I
even think that puts them over the hump though. That doesn't make them a championship
Yeah,
team.
that's the other question. Like, because then it would be like Lillard, Edwards, I guess McDaniels, Gobert.
Like
You know,
that doesn't scream ring to me. I think him in that Miami situation would
yeah,
be perfect because they need
it would
another
be
scorer.
interesting. It would be interesting at the very least because you would have scoring, you would have defense. Because you have, I guess, Edwards and McDaniels and Gobert. But like I said, I don't feel like Minnesota would want to do that. I
I
mean,
don't think
maybe
they're
they
interested.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's like I just don't know because Minnesota is definitely a team to keep an eye on just because of the fact
Absolutely.
that they have the too big situation. I know the GM I think the other day came out and was like, we're confident in that we can make this work, and maybe they do. Personally, I don't see it. I mean, I guess it's better than last year. Edwards takes another step forward, but I don't. I don't feel like that duo is going to work between Towns and Edwards, or excuse me, Towns and Gobert.
Right.
So I mean, it's possible, but like I don't know. I almost feel like I'm almost kind of with you where it's like if it's not Miami, I just don't really know who else it is because it just doesn't seem like these other teams are really pushing, to make that big push for Lillard, which you would almost think they would, but they just haven't. So
Yeah. And this is a developing story, so we'll try and keep you guys updated, every time we hear something. Even if it's like the most minor thing ever, like if it's like, say like Lillard crosses off Miami, like we'll let you know. We're just gonna report on everything Lillard until the trade happens. And I guess like the next topic that we've kind of laid out for this episode is, some stuff and some guys that have happened or, that have played well in Vegas since we kind of departed. So to kick this off, we kind of each picked three guys that we thought were pretty interesting. Um, so the first one for me is Keontae George. I think this one kind of goes undisputed. The biggest question for him was, can he actually score consistently at the NBA level? Like, we knew what he could do in high school. We kind of saw flashes of it in college. I always thought he chose the wrong program. It's neither here nor there, but he has had, some pretty good games. And I feel like, the summer league is kind of his style of play. Like, it's like a tournament, it's something closer to that college level. There's room for error and things like that. But he's really impressed me thus far. And I think he's definitely one to keep your eye on. He's worth watching. The scoring potential is definitely there. I think through two games, he's had like what, almost 60 points,
Yeah.
17 assists, and almost 11 threes made, I think. So he's been on fire. And, it's something to get excited about because I think Utah may have found, their budget Donovan Mitchell potentially. So I'm very curious to see, how he develops as a player, or it could, just be a short little summer league stint. But I think he'll be good once he finds that maturity, especially at the NBA, the real NBA level. Um, and then to move on into my next guy, um, Orlando Robinson. He's really good. Um, he's not even really like a rookie because I think he played around what 31 games for the Heat last season. Um, but like
Yep.
on that roster, it's kind of interesting because like Bam was at center, but then he's backed up by Cody Zeller, and then Kevin Love came in, and then he took up a little bit of minutes at like the five. So it's like he kind of fell out of the rotation. Um, but man, oh man, he is no longer an afterthought. I don't think in two games, I think he averaged around 25 points on almost 60% shooting with 10
Right.
rebounds a night. So that's something to keep your eye on for sure. I think, we may be seeing him develop a little bit more. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at. And I think I just got a notey. I think it's from Bleacher Report. So Whitmore ties the summer league record. I think this was for steals. I think it
Yeah.
was steals. Yeah, so he just
8
dropped
steals.
yeah, so he had 26 points, the win, and 8 steals. And we talked about that in our last episode. Cam Whitmore, he had a interesting debut, but his second game he looked very cool, composed, definitely took his time and was not, rushing and just going in there making boneheaded plays like the first night. So yeah, this is cool to see because this is somebody who fell significantly in the draft. I had him top 5 and he went pretty low, but I think, Houston potentially got a steal here. So just wanted to shout him out real quick because I saw the notey. And then my next guy, Dominic Barlow. This is somebody who has flown under the radar for I think a lot of people just because he's playing with Wemby, so he's already kind of in his shadow. But yeah, this is summer league, so he was on a two-way contract with the Spurs last season. Um, After being undrafted out of overtime elite, so that was our mistake. The Thompson twins are not the first people to come out of overtime elite, so it's Dominic Barlow, but he didn't really do much. But it's interesting because I feel like he could definitely lock up a roster spot for sure. And he had 17 points and 6 rebounds against the Blazers in Wemby's second game, which was really good. So Wemby's game kind of overshadowed what Dominic Barlow did, but you'll see in our vlog actually he was dunking a lot, getting a lot of fast break points and hit a couple threes. So shout out to him for sure. And I think, he comes with an NBA body and could be really another success in like, the Spurs development program because I feel like they're one of the better teams, um, in terms of development. We've seen some tough guys come out of there. So those are the three guys, technically four, that I think have really stood out since we've left. But yeah, what were yours?
Yeah, I mean, the guys that I'm looking at as well, it's Jordan Walsh, for Boston. He was a guy that I think we mentioned, in the live stream,
Yeah.
as a guy that's got some real potential, to be a valuable player.
Hmm.
Boston, during his time in the summer league, right, like 18 points a game, right, 44% from the field, 39% from three, 37% three. Also playing great defense, right, and again, those speedway types of players, those are the type of guys that Boston is looking for, right? They want guys that can shoot, they want guys that can defend, and they want guys with a little bit more size, right? He's like 6'7". Um, so I think he's a really he could potentially be a really valuable player for Boston. Maybe not necessarily right away, because again, it's very rare for rookies to be big time contributors that are trying to win championships. But
Yeah.
either way, Boston, it feels like they're kind of a guy short in terms of like a wing. Um, because obviously they have the two Brown, Tatum, and their starting five, but it just feels like it would always be nice for them to have one more, just so that that way, like in the lineup, where one of those guys is off the floor, they still have a good mix of size and length. So I think he's a guy that if he continues to develop and continues to shoot and defend well, he's going to pan out for them. Um, Another guy that I had mentioned for New Orleans, Arian Sebring. So he's the guy that's on a two-way contract, right? So he wasn't drafted by them, right? But he's on
Right.
their team. Um, and so far through the summer league, he's been averaging like 6.7 rebounds, 3 assists. Pretty much showing some, all around ability, right? As sort of like a scorer, type of guy. Um, and again, like with New Orleans, right? Like he's gonna play a lot. No, probably not, because he's a
Probably not.
guy. And, he's not on the actual roster, but he is a guy that I think so far has been impressive. And even if it's not New Orleans, right? I think he's a guy that can stick around, right? Because he's a long athlete. That's a forward with some skill, some scoring ability. And a lot of teams could use that, and even defensively, right? Like he's been pretty solid. For the most part. Obviously the competition is different, right? But he's basically in a way like been their most impressive guy in the summer league outside of I think Dyson Daniels, who's their second year guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hawkins okay,
Yeah.
um, but not quite as good as Dyson Daniels, which you'd expect because Dyson Daniels is going to be a second year guy.
Yeah.
But Sebrin's kind of been like their second best player for the most part during the summer league.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the last guy, Leonard Miller, right? So that's Minnesota's pick, right? He was on that G League Ignite team, Scoot. And again, just another guy, right? Like a long, athletic, 6'9", 6'8" ish forward. Um, and he's even shown like some decent offensive ability, right? Like 16
Yeah.
points in his first game, 20 points in his second game, 18 in his third game. Pretty efficient as well, from the floor, right? 50%. Even from three in a couple of these games, not like on a ton of volume, right?
Yeah.
But still, like, that was kind of the question mark for him, coming into the league is, can he shoot it all, right? Because we know he's a good athlete. We know he can defend. We know he can rebound and do a lot of other things. He's got to be able to shoot.
Yep.
Um, I still don't necessarily trust the shot right now. Um, you know, uh, in terms of like right away, because I mean, we again, he was another guy that we did kind of see, um, play a little bit, right? And again, his shot is a little bit, unorthodox.
Yeah. Very.
Yeah, but again, if he can kind of continue to figure it out and continue to add on to that all around game, he's another guy that could look like a steal. I mean, because again, I feel like he's already kind of a steal. But the main thing he just needs to continue to work on is the shooting. But everything else is there because again, you can't miss the height, the length, and the athleticism. And he's got a great motor as well. Because again, like just having that dynamic skill set at that size. I mean, because he's got a decent handle. Um, as well, right? So, those type of factors in a player are really, I think, cool to have. Especially for a team like Minnesota, that just is kind of in this weird spot, right, where they have the two bigs. They just lost Torian Prince, obviously, so it always needs more wings. Um, and again, like, because that'll help you in those lineups where say it's like just one of those bigs, right? If it's just Sounds or just Gobert, you could always use another big forward.
Yeah.
So again, like I think he's another guy that so far has really stood out to me.
Yeah.
In
I agree.
some, yeah. So I mean, I guess at this point, like, not much else going on around the league right now. Obviously, the summer league is still going on, for sure, right? Harden, obviously, kind of similar to Lillard, right? Nothing's really happened there as of yet. We've heard some sources, right, where like say Dave McMenamin of ESPN, he thinks that Harden will be back, to Philly, whereas other people of the Athletic, they think the Harden is still trying to get his way out of there. So it's kind of like the Lillard situation where we're just gonna have to wait and see. Um, again with Harden opting in, that was kind of definitely a surprise. I think to most people,
Yeah.
right? Everybody expected him to opt out and sign a long-term deal, with Philly or something like that. But I guess he just probably didn't like the money that was out there.
Right.
So he's pretty much going into a contract year, right? Anybody that has him with the team, even if it's like it's whether or not it's Philly or say the Clippers, like they're gonna have him for 1 year, basically, on like
Yeah.
I don't even want to call it a proof, just given like where he's at in his career. But obviously you got some concerns with him because he's forced his way out, multiple times. In ways that are pretty rough, in terms of coming into the seasons, not in great shape. And basically kind of like laying an egg in terms of like quitting the team. Um, and those are concerns that another team is going to have, in trading, right? Like if you're the Clippers, right? Or if you're any other team.
Yeah.
Even though, again, really, there haven't been that many teams that have been mentioned for him either. So you almost wonder maybe is it possible that those guys, kind of like get roped into a trade together? Maybe. Um, but again, like there just hasn't been a lot of traction there. So we're at this point, we're just kind of, until those trades happen, we're kind of in this weird spot, in NBA limbo where, again, there's nothing. Free agency is basically wrapped up. There's still a few guys left, not very many. Um, so now we're just kind of in the trade rumor mill for the most part. We're basically at a point now, in the off season where free agency's done. It's basically done. There's not very many guys left.
Sure.
I think some of these guys are probably just waiting on these other trades to happen, right? Like let's say Christian Wood, maybe he's waiting on say Miami or the Clippers or some other team, right? To make these deals, and
Hmm.
if they do, maybe he goes there, and then if he doesn't, right, maybe he goes elsewhere because he's a guy that was kind of squeezed out of the free agency market, right? He was making, I guess like what, like 13 to
Yeah.
16 or something
Somewhere
like
about
that
that. Yeah.
a year, right? And then now he's probably going to have to take, well, definitely going to take less than that, right? So
Hmm.
either whoever has an exception left or the league minimum, kind of basically on I would assume a 1 year prove it deal.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in this dry spell now where not a whole lot is going on at this point. Obviously, you still have summer league, right? But we're not close enough to like training camp where we can kind of like fully talk about a lot of what these teams are right now. We can talk
Yeah.
about, some of them, but not all of them. But we still have a lot of rumors going on, right? So like say Tim McMahon of ESPN, he kind of mentioned on his podcast on ESPN the idea that Dallas could still make some other moves. Obviously, we know that they tried to get Matisse Thybulle and Portland ended up matching that offer, which makes sense, right? Obviously, if you're Portland, you don't want to lose him for nothing, and there's always a potential to trade him later. Um, but say like he mentioned that they could potentially move Josh Green and Jaden Hardy, right? Those are two young guys for Dallas. Um, and it's kind of funny because when you think about it, Dallas has a ton of guards.
They do.
So in a way, it kind of makes sense, to move some of those guards, for someone else. I mean, Josh Green is closer to like a guard wing, like
Hmm.
right, because he's like what 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah.
Whereas Hardy is just like a straight guard, a
Right.
straight up guard.
Yeah, I get you.
Um, so I mean, like I would be a little more hesitant to move Green than Hardy, but at the same time, like it depends on what you get back, right? Like he mentioned, like it's possible Dallas could, try to figure out a way to get Boyan Bogdanovic over
True.
there. I mean, I guess that'd be interesting. I guess
Doesn't
like I
make me
said,
jump out of
personally,
my seat though.
yeah, if I'm Dallas, I would personally prefer to get some type of defensive minded wing. Um, or even if it's not a wing, right? Like somebody who can guard the other team's opposing guards, right? Because like neither Luca nor Kyrie are going to guard the other team's opposing backcourt.
Right.
So I mean, that's kind of what I would look for as opposed to Boyan. I think Boyan's a good player, but I feel like he really only fits like a handful of teams.
Yeah.
Unless he's coming off the bench, but I feel like money wise, he's like and skill wise, like he probably will be a starter for whoever trades for him. I could be wrong, but either way, like Dallas should be an active team because they definitely did get better, but did they get good enough where it's like, are they close to what they were 2 seasons ago when they got to the conference finals? I
Right.
don't know about that just yet.
Yeah. It's tough.
My opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, m- more, I guess, Nets Blazers stuff, right? The Nets don't really want to include Simmons or Bridges. Again, makes sense. Because obviously if you're Brooklyn and you're trying to get Damian Lillard, you'd prefer to keep Bridges.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Simmons, I'm not sure because again, there's just a lot of question marks about him right now. Just because he hasn't been healthy. We haven't
Lost his
seen him play in a
confidence.
while. Yeah, exactly. We haven't seen him play in a while, and when he's played, he hasn't really been that good. But at the same time, like you know, he was at a point in his career at one point where he was, really good. He was like an all NBA, all defensive guy. It'd be kind of surprising if he just can't figure out how to play basketball anymore. But
Right.
maybe Brooklyn still believes in that, or maybe they're just kind of like looking at him as sort of like a sunken cost. So maybe he's just gonna be like a salary guy. I don't know, but at least the Bridges one I can understand completely, just because again, like right now he's your best player. So if you're Brooklyn, you'd want to pair him with somebody.
Yeah. I agree. Um, and for me, like, I think Simmons has potential upside for sure because we know what he is, when he's really good. But the problem is he's lost his confidence, and I don't know if he'll ever get that back. So, it's kind of unfortunate to see the turn that his career has taken. And honestly, I would think that Brooklyn would really be shopping him because that was kind of something that we had talked about, I think, a couple episodes ago. So that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting to hear that he's not going to be included. So I'm curious to see, maybe if they potentially include him because he pretty much fell out of the rotation, and then the quote
Yeah.
unquote injuries, that didn't help. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what happens with him.
Yeah. According to Jake Fisher, the Knicks are looking to potentially move Evan Fournier. Makes sense. He was kind of a guy that was looked at maybe at the deadline, as somebody who could have gotten moved. And again, he's on a contract, that's relatively large. I think it's basically an expiring at this point, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. Um, and again, like he's also was out of the rotation. So if you're the Knicks, right, you're looking to upgrade your roster.
Yeah.
And obviously you can kind of start, by moving on from guys that aren't really a part of your team at this point. Um, I think there are teams that could probably use him. Um, because again, he's a guy that does have some, experience, right? He is a guy that's a good shooter. So he's got value. I don't know how much.
Right.
Considering we saw some of these other contracts, just kind of get dumped for not a whole lot, but so I don't feel like they're going to get a lot back for him, but maybe that's not what they're looking to do. Maybe they're just looking to get back like, another player on like a similar-ish contract that's not great, but probably like just fits better with what the Knicks are trying to do than Fournier.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Um Another Jake Fisher rumor, the Suns are looking to maybe move campaign, maybe for TJ McConnell in a possible three-team deal. I feel like that probably would be an upgrade. Um, for the most part, right? We know campaign has kind of been, other than, that year for Phoenix when they went to the finals, his tenure there hasn't really been that great. Again, he's primarily an offensive minded guard that, isn't that consistent. Um, and you don't really need as much of his skill set now that you have, Bradley Beal, with Devin Booker and Durant. You don't really need like, a score first point guard, that's going to take shots away from those guys.
Right.
You probably would like, yeah, you probably would like a more traditional, point guard, that can
Or
kind of
even
just,
defensive
set
too.
some, yeah, exactly. And McConnell's a better defender. Kind of like more of like a throwback traditional point guard.
Right.
Not really much of an outside shooter
Mm-mm.
per se. Doesn't really take those type of shots. But I do think it would be an upgrade for the most part for Phoenix, just because I think like in terms of skill, like they're in relatively similar tiers where they're both backup level point guards. But I think for what Phoenix would like to get, I think that's probably just a better fit because again he defends better and he's not going to take shots away from those guys.
Yeah.
Um, Another rumor from Jake Fisher: Pacers are eyeing a more traditional power forward. Names like Tobias Harris, Harrison Barnes, OG Anunoby. I feel like two of those aren't really like I don't feel like any of those are like traditional power forwards, but I guess
Yeah.
in today's NBA, they make more sense. Tobias Harris makes more sense at the four
Yeah.
than he does at the three.
I would think
Like
so too. Yeah.
yeah, like defensively, he's probably better guarding fours than he is guarding threes. But
Mm-hmm.
like offensively, right, his skill set is a little closer, to like a wing, like a small forward. Um, Barnes, kind of a similar guy, right? OG Anunoby, he's been used as a guard, like a 2-3 for Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
I can't it's hard for me to like envision him as like a power forward, but Indiana does seem to like a lot of these really small lineups.
Yeah.
Because they were doing that a lot last year, which I guess part of it was also they just didn't have very many big guys outside of Miles Turner. And I guess Jalen Smith. So I mean, it makes sense because again, Indiana, clearly, they were looking for more wings in the draft, right? They drafted, Jerace Walker,
Mm-hmm.
or they traded for him in the draft,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense. And I do think, like I said, that team probably just does need a little bit more size at that forward spot because again, they were really small last year outside of Turner. Like they had
Very.
Andrew, what is his name? Aaron Neesmith. My bad,
Yes.
Aaron Neesmith, like as a power forward for a lot of the season, and he's he's a 2-3. He's not a 4.
Yeah.
So I think it makes a lot of sense. Again, those guys specifically, I think that's fine because again, like you're Indiana, you're not trading for a star, right? But those type of guys, I think, are guys that make sense.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that because I don't know. Indiana's an interesting squad, but I think they definitely made the right decision, picking up Jerace Walker. So it would be interesting to see them add some more size.
Yeah. LeBron said on the SBs he's not retiring. No surprise there. We didn't, it was,
Given.
kind of suggested or hinted at, after the Lakers got eliminated, but I don't think either of us bought that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I still think some of it was just probably just not exactly being happy about losing to Denver, which I understand, but I never thought he was retiring, and not without like not without like a final season thing,
Right.
where it kind of
A
like
send
with
off.
Kobe, yeah, the send off, the farewell season.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like that. That's not happening. Because I didn't expect him to retire after that.
Right.
Yeah. Another rumor, Randall, reportedly the Knicks only really want to trade him for an Embiid type or Embiid, I guess, level player. That's kind of bizarre because there's not very many players much better than Joel Embiid. So that's basically saying, we're not going to trade Julius Randle unless it's for like a top 5, top 10 player, which I don't really feel like that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I do understand, he was coming off a good regular season, not a great postseason, although in fairness, he did, have an ankle problem that he had to get surgery on. So that has to be factored in as well. Um, is there a team you can think of like on the top of your head where you're like, oh, it would make, it would be an interesting fit to see Julius Randle in that environment? Or is it just like, or do you feel like the Knicks might just kind of like be stuck with him? Not in a bad way, because
I,
it's not like he's a bad player, but
I know
we
what
know
you
he's
mean.
had back rough postseasons.
I,
So like your ceiling as for the Knicks is probably capped off. Just because your second best player is Julius Randle, who just hasn't elevated himself in the playoffs up to this point.
Yeah, like Julius Randle's interesting. I feel like he's a good player, not a great player. That's kind of the best way I can describe him. And it's like I feel like he's kind of stuck in New York because they've built him up to be, what he is now. And I think they've personally overrated him. And that's not, the fan base. I think that's more so the management and what they've done because it seems like they've kind of quote unquote builded around Randle. And it's like now that you've done that, I don't know any other team that would really buy into that. Um, and I really can't think of any off the top of my head, because like
Right.
his game is so interesting. Like it's come a long way from what he was when he first came into the league. He was more of like your traditional power forward, even center sometimes.
Right.
But now he's kind of taken a transition where it's like he kind of is like a three-level scorer and can take you from any level. But at the same time, it's not always consistent. But when he is
Right.
doing his job well, I definitely feel like the potential is there, but when he's off, it's really bad. It's not consistent enough for me.
Right. Yeah, I just think he's got the ball in his hands a little bit too
Exactly.
much,
Yeah.
for my liking. But I don't know. Like, I don't think you're gonna get an Embiid back type player back for Randall, unless it's a scenario where like Embiid, let's say Embiid asks for a trade, and then like the Knicks are one of his preferred teams, and then the Knicks are like, well, we'll give up Julius Randle.
Yeah.
Like I could see that. But I couldn't see like the Knicks just pulling off like a mutual thing where it's like, hey, we have Julius Randle, you have a top 10 player, let's make a deal. Like I don't see that happening. Like I said, unless it's a trade request type of deal.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And then lastly, Zach Lowe, basically or not lastly, excuse me, just erase that out. Let me start over. My bad. Wrong rumor. I read it wrong.
Mm.
Another rumor, according to Jovan Buha of the Athletic, he reports that Gabe Vincent has a quote unquote legitimate chance to start over D'Angelo Russell.
Okay.
So basically, he believes that the starting position is going to be up for grabs. It's an open competition, for that starting point guard spot. Um, basically, kind of his, I guess, sort of I guess arguments for it is that he's the better defender and a more natural off-ball fit just because he's a lower usage guy.
Okay.
And because yeah, so basically I guess saying like a better two-way player
Okay.
for the most part. So that's kind of, I guess, where he thinks he's got a legitimate chance to start. I mean, we'll see. I mean, they did sign him to a 3-year, $33 million deal, so that's basically 11 million a year.
Hmm.
D'Angelo Russell signed that 2-year, $36-ish million deal, right? Second year's a player option, and I believe with the new CBA, he waived his de facto no trade clause, so that basically means he can be traded. Because normally if you have like a 1 year or like 1+1 deal, I think in the past you could basically like kind of like say no to a trade,
Right.
because you would sacrifice, I think, what is it, like your early bird rights or whatever.
Right.
Um, but for him, he declined that because in the new CBA you can do that, and that was probably like some type of requirement that they were gonna like, yeah, if we're gonna give you this contract, you're gonna have to do this. So there's potential. It's kind of interesting. We're already talking about moving on from him potentially, and
I
he
know,
just
right?
signed a new deal. But I mean, I guess it's possible because again, like last year, for the Lakers, I remember the reports about like, yeah, there's no guarantees, other than LeBron and AD, other than LeBron and AD are going to start, right? And Westbrook began as the starter, then he came off the bench. Whereas Dennis Schroeder, ended up once he was healthy, he came back in. So I mean, it's definitely possible. Um, I am curious to see, what that looks like. Because again, like, you could make an argument for either guy. I mean, I would say probably the regular season D'Lo's probably the better player.
Hmm.
Um, but either way, like, I could see a world where Vincent starts, but I would be kind of surprised if that happened while D'Lo was on the team. It would feel like I feel like it would make more sense if D'Lo was already moved as opposed to like right now. But that's apparently what Jovan Buha thinks.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I understand the logic. Like, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, I do understand, say like, D'Lo coming off the bench and he commands the second unit. I think that's fine, but I think, just because he's the higher paid player and I feel like he does do some things that Vincent can't do, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, I think D'Lo is a better player than Gabe Vincent. Overall, I think he's a better point guard as well, but the playoff performance was really bad from D'Lo, so I do understand the hesitancy and maybe even the willingness to move on. So I get it, and I think any level of competition is good. And to use the football analogy, um, point guard is basically like quarterback. So the more competition you have in the quarterback room, is it's for the better because you're pushing guys to be better. So sometimes people just need a fire lit underneath them, and hopefully that can potentially make D'Lo play a little bit better when it counts.
Yeah, and like, and again, like there's no guarantees because let's say that other forward spot next to LeBron and AD, right? It could be Rui, that steps into that starting spot just because now he's being paid, more per year.
Yeah.
They could potentially continue to start Vanderbilt, but you never know. That's like you said, competition is a good thing. Obviously with the starting five, it's not always the best five, right? Usually it's more about, who plays the most and who's going to close.
Yeah.
Um, but it almost just kind of makes me feel more so like, it's a setup, so that way by the time the trade deadline rolls around, he could be moved.
Sure.
Not that there's a guarantee there, but that's just kind of what it feels like that they're going to try to see, at the trade deadline if they can find a deal for him. Because again, it's not if you move D'Lo and you get somebody else back, and Gabe Vincent slides into that starting point guard spot, it's not like a huge loss. It just kind of depends on what you can get back for D'Angelo Russell. I
I
just don't
agree.
know how much stock he has, right now. Obviously, his contract, again, it's only 2 years. The second year is a player option. So if he plays well, he could opt out and sign a new deal.
Mhm.
And then obviously, if he doesn't play well, he would pick up that option.
Yep.
So, it'll be interesting to see what happens, for sure. But
Absolutely.
like I said, the fact that it's already out there after he signed a new
Yeah, that's
contract,
wild.
it just does kind of make me feel like that. Yeah, there's definitely a high possibility that he's not a Laker, by the trade deadline. If
Yeah.
there's a deal out there. That's kind of what I thought. Anyways, like when before they signed him to a new deal, where I was like, yeah, he probably gets re-signed, but I don't think he's there like long term, just because again, you're just concerned about what it looks like from a playoff environment. We know regular season, he's fine. You could do a lot worse in the regular season than D'Angelo Russell. But as the playoffs continued to go, it just became more and more of a struggle because he was good in other rounds. Just by the time it got to Denver, it
Yeah,
just
it was
became a
rough.
mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I look at it for right
Mhm.
now. And then finally, Zach Lowe, according to him, the Knicks view Carl Anthony Towns' contract as too onerous. And that's kind of like been, I guess, like a reason why they don't really want to trade for him, which again makes sense. I think he recently, last offseason, I think he signed a 4 year, $224 million supermax extension, right? So he's going to be, one of the highest paid players. And again, he's a really good player, but, he also has some flaws. And if you're the Knicks, do you really want to put all your eggs into,
No,
the Carl Anthony Towns basket? Probably not.
no.
Um, so like I feel, and again, there are guys, that are worse than him, that you could end up trading for. But just in terms of the personality, in terms of the fit, I just feel like you probably want to look elsewhere if you're the Knicks. So I
Yeah,
think I understand. Like
yeah,
just because again, there's definitely a scenario where maybe Philly either bungles the Harden trade or something just falls apart and then Embiid wants out. And if you're the Knicks, you'd probably prefer to take on Joel Embiid than Carl Anthony Towns.
sure. And like, this isn't a knock on Towns, but this is just me speaking the truth in my opinion. I feel like he's more of a diva kind of player, and that's just kind of the vibe that I get from him. Not self-centered, but in terms of the way
Right.
that he kind of moves and around his teammates and with the media specifically. It seems like
And I just
a little like full of himself, if that makes sense.
And I just and I just don't know if he's the caliber of player where you can kinda, like, get away with doing that. You can get
Right,
away with that if you're, like, top 5,
right.
top 10 type of guy, but I don't think you can do that when you're, like when he's kinda, like, I guess, in that bubble of, top 20,
Right. There's people who are
25.
clearly better. It would be different if he was, the number one center in the league. Okay, then we can have that conversation. But
Right,
it's like, and if he goes to New York, I don't even think that fits well with what they do over there. Whether it be coaching, fan base. I just don't think that works. Knicks fans, they are
right.
very cocky, deservedly so, because they're in the Big Apple. But at the same time, I don't think that's gonna
Yeah,
mesh well. You need more humble guys like Brunson,
yeah.
RJ
They're
Barrett,
kinda
guys
like
like that.
yeah, they're kinda like in that Philly-ish tier, sort of, a little below them where it's
Sure.
like, if you play really hard and you play, really well,
They love you.
they'll love you,
Look at Josh
right?
Hart.
But yeah, exactly. But when you start, playing poorly or you're not giving a lot of effort or you kind of just like, in that quitting mode, like they're going to turn on you
And look
really
at
quickly.
Randall. I mean, like they
Yeah,
vandalized his
yeah,
posters and stuff. So,
exactly.
I
So,
don't think Towns is built for that environment. Just saying. I think,
right.
he needs to stay probably West Coast in a more even keel environment like Minnesota or, somewhere like Portland, somewhere
Yeah,
that's more like low key.
right. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, obviously if you haven't already done so, make sure to check out our previous episode, where we're live in person,
Yeah.
from Las Vegas talking about the Las Vegas Summer League. Obviously, of course, at the same time this episode vlog, kind of showcasing our experience in Vegas.
Yep.
And again, we also appreciate, the new subscribers, and the comments that we're getting, say from, people like Xander Cade, right? We
Yeah. Shout out
appreciate that.
him.
Yeah, exactly. We appreciate that support as well. So, continue to leave your thoughts in the comments. Again, continue to don't forget to like and subscribe. So thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday.